Well, the question is what I consider to be one of the most important things when learning foreign languages in general. And, well, I think this is a very difficult question. This is a very difficult question in so many different ways, and you can approach it from so many different perspectives. You can approach it as a linguist, you can approach it as a pragmatician, you can approach it as a language learner. So basically what I'm going to say is based only on my experience. It's not an opinion of a professional. It's not something that's been confirmed by research. It's just something that I personally believe in. In terms of the linguistic systems or the language, the layers that are important in learning foreign languages, whether it's grammar or pronunciation or pragmatics, I don't think any one of those is the most important one. I don't think that it's more important to learn vocabulary rather than grammar, or grammar rather than pronunciation. I think that all those levels are very important, and I think if you want to be successful as a language learner, you need to keep developing in all those areas and not to get fixated on any one of those, on any single area, because that's ultimately going to inhibit your progress. I think that in terms of pronunciation, the importance of learning pronunciation sometimes is overstated. That is, learners try and sound like native speakers, even though it's not. I would consider it more important to be pragmatically efficient rather than to sound like a native speaker. Of course, it's true that whenever you speak a foreign language, whenever you try and engage in any kind of social situation, you index certain qualities, you project your identity, and it's all true. But at the same time, I think when you use language to do real things in the real world, you need to accept the fact that sometimes you're going to make mistakes, and sometimes it's basically more important to be an efficient communicator rather than concentrate on aspects aspects such as pronunciation. So in other words, what I'm trying to say is that it's ultimately much more important to be an efficient communicator rather than be always 100% and be always and to follow the model that you've chosen, be British or American or any other model, depending on the kind of language that you learn. So all of those things are important. I think what I've learned about the Polish context is that sometimes this idea that you need to sound like a native speaker, or that you need to be a model for your students, is something that given my experience, that I don't agree with. I think that what students need and what teachers need is exposure to variety. When it comes to English, it's so varied. There are so many, obviously, native speakers of English, but many more non-native speakers of English who use English as a lingua franca, that it's ultimately more important to be exposed to varieties of English rather than try and follow a model. So that will be one aspect of what I think about learning the language. The second aspect, and perhaps a more personal one, is that kind of slavishly following a given model kills all the joy of language learning. I think as a language learner, you need to have a very big tolerance for ambiguity and very big tolerance for imperfection. So if you're a perfectionist, it may be a bit of a curse when you're learning language, because I don't believe it's possible to always be perfect in all the sort of functional levels, be it grammar, pronunciation, vocabulary. You can't be perfect. There's always be a level that you can't reach, but at the same time you can always push towards being better. And I think that's what wins, as far as I'm concerned, when it comes to learning languages in general, that you need to be aware of the limitations and accept them, but at the same time all the time keep pushing. And it doesn't matter whether you sound like a person from California, or like a person from Scotland, from Edinburgh, or like a Mancunian, an English-speaking person born and raised in Manchester. I don't think it matters that much. My name is Piotr Godziński. I work at Manchester Metropolitan University. I'm a lecturer in applied linguistics. I specialize in linguistic pragmatics. Now that you know what my sort of personal take on language learning is, I can tell you a little bit more about my own language journey. I emigrated to the UK over 6 years ago. I got a job here at the university, and at that time I considered myself quite an experienced language user, especially that I taught English at the university level. I also taught phonetics and pronunciation, but the more I stayed in the UK, the more my perspective on language learning changed. And that especially pertains to pronunciation. I used to be a pronunciation teacher at the university level, so my job was to prepare students to the role as teachers, as language models, as I used to say at the time. But it was very difficult to actually admit to the fact at the time that in terms of my exposure, my own exposure to varieties of English, it was very limited. So I remember distinctly when I first came to the UK, at the time when I decided to emigrate, I had to interact with the bus driver from Liverpool, and I asked him a very simple question about which bus I should take, and he responded to me in Scouse, in the accent used by in Liverpool, and I didn't understand a single word he was saying, and that was the first sort of bitter and a very frustrating experience that I thought to myself at the time. I've been learning the language for over 20 years, and I still can't understand what a bus driver says to me in Liverpool in a relatively simple, straightforward, everyday situation. Now, after those 6 years, I no longer have problems understanding what the bus drivers are saying, but that I think is important to admit that it's not always possible to understand everybody, but in order to try and understand more people, you need exposure. And I think that's something that kind of gets forgotten in this quest for being a native speaker, or following a model, or being like a native speaker. And I believe that in the most current sociolinguistic paradigms, this is what's referred to as native speakerism, and it's not something that's actually supported, pedagogically speaking, in the UK. At the university where I work, pronunciation is not taught explicitly. It's something that's kind of acquired. It's considered to be important to be understood by other people, but not to the point in which any norms are imposed in a top-down fashion. I hope you've enjoyed the lecture, and good luck.